Bullies slam her head on a locker. Not knowing she's an ex-secret agent, Maya Rodriguez walked through the hallways of Riverside High School with her head down, clutching her worn backpack straps like they were lifelines. At 17, she was small for her age, barely 5'3", with shoulder-length black hair that she kept tucked behind her ears and thick-rimmed glasses that made her dark eyes look larger than they were. Her clothes were simple and unremarkable, faded jeans, plain t-shirts, and scuffed sneakers that had seen better days. To everyone at Riverside High, she was just another quiet, forgettable transfer student who had appeared 3 weeks into the semester. What they didn't know was that Maya Rodriguez had spent the last 4 years of her life in a classified government training program, learning skills that would make Navy SEALs envious. She could disarm a grown man in 3 seconds, break bones with precise pressure points, and had once taken down 5 armed targets in complete darkness, using nothing but her bare hands. But those days were behind her now, sealed away in classified files that would never see the light of day. Maya had been pulled from the program after a mission went wrong, not because she failed, but because the psychological evaluation afterward showed she was losing herself in the violence. The agency decided she needed a normal life, a chance to be a regular teenager. Her handler, Agent Morrison, had arranged for her to live with a foster family in suburban Ohio and attend regular high school. "Try to fit in," he had told her. "Try to be normal." But normal was harder than any mission she'd ever completed. The trouble started on her second day at Riverside High. She was sitting alone in the cafeteria, picking at a wilted salad, when Chelsea Patterson approached her table. Chelsea was the kind of girl who ruled high school through fear and social manipulation, tall, blonde, with the confident stride of someone who had never been told no. She was flanked by her 2 loyal followers, Amber, a redhead with a perpetual sneer, and Jess, a brunette who seemed to exist solely to laugh at Chelsea's jokes. "Well, well," Chelsea said, sliding uninvited into the seat across from Maya. "If it isn't the weird new girl. What's your name again? Maria? Martha?" "Maya," she replied quietly, not looking up from her food. "Maya," Chelsea repeated mockingly. "That's like Mexican or something, right? Did you swim here?" The comment hit Maya like a physical blow, but she forced herself to remain still. In her previous life, someone making a racist comment like that would have found themselves on the floor within seconds. But Maya Rodriguez, the secret agent, was gone. Now she was just Maya Rodriguez, the high school student, and high school students didn't break bullies' wrists for being ignorant. "I was born in Texas," Maya said softly. Chelsea laughed. "Same difference. Why don't you eat lunch somewhere else tomorrow? This table is kind of reserved for people who actually matter." Maya looked up then, meeting Chelsea's cold blue eyes for just a moment. In that brief glance, something passed between them. Maya's trained instincts cataloging potential threats, noting the way Chelsea sat, the positioning of her hands, the micro-expressions that revealed insecurity masked by aggression. But instead of acting on those instincts, Maya simply nodded and packed up her lunch. "Good girl," Chelsea said with false sweetness. "I think we're going to get along just fine." The harassment escalated over the following weeks. Chelsea and her friends seemed to have made Maya their personal project. They would knock books out of her hands in the hallways, accidentally bump into her hard enough to send her stumbling, and whisper cruel comments just loud enough for her to hear. In biology class, Amber switched Maya's lab samples, causing her experiment to fail. In English, Jess spread rumors that Maya couldn't read properly, pointing to her accent when she was called on to read aloud. Maya endured it all in silence, her training screaming at her to fight back, while her new mission, to be normal, demanded she stay passive. During the worst moments, she would close her eyes and remember Agent Morrison's words. "Violence isn't always the answer, Rodriguez. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away." But walking away was getting harder every day. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday afternoon in November. Maya was at her locker, switching out textbooks for her final period, when Chelsea appeared beside her like a predator sensing weakness. Maya's enhanced hearing had picked up the approach seconds earlier. 3 sets of footsteps, Chelsea's confident stride flanked by her followers' eager shuffling, but she forced herself not to react. "Hey, Rodriguez," Chelsea said, leaning against the neighboring locker. "I heard something interesting about you today." Maya continued organizing her books, not trusting herself to speak. Her hands, trained to be weapons, trembled slightly as she gripped her chemistry textbook. "Apparently, you've been telling people you're from some special school in DC, Chelsea continued. "What kind of special school exactly? Special ed?" Amber and Jess giggled on cue. Maya's jaw tightened. She had never told anyone about her background, had created a cover story about transferring from a private school in Washington. Someone must have overheard her foster mother mentioning it to a neighbor. "Was it one of those schools for freaks and weirdos?" Chelsea pressed. "Is that why you're so weird? Why you never talk to anyone? Why you eat lunch alone, like some kind of mental patient?" Maya slowly closed her locker and turned to face her tormentors. For just a moment, her carefully constructed mask slipped, and something dangerous flickered in her dark eyes. Chelsea, despite all her bravado, took an unconscious step backward. "I'm not looking for trouble," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying an edge that made several nearby students stop their conversations. Chelsea recovered quickly, her face flushing with embarrassment at her momentary retreat. "Did you just threaten me, freak? Did the little Mexican girl just try to act tough?" Before Maya could respond, Chelsea shoved her backward, hard. Maya's back slammed into the lockers with a metallic crash that echoed through the hallway. Pain shot through her shoulder blades, but it was nothing compared to the rage building in her chest. "Oops," Chelsea said with mock concern. "Did I hurt the little baby? Maybe you should go crying to whatever government program spit you out." Maya's blood turned to ice. There was no way Chelsea could know about her real background unless someone had been digging into her sealed files, but the comment was too specific, too targeted to be a coincidence. "What did you say?" Maya asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Chelsea smiled triumphantly, sensing she had struck a nerve. "You heard me. We know all about your little secret, Rodriguez. Did you really think you could just show up here and pretend to be normal? Did you think no one would figure out what kind of freak you really are?" The hallway had gone completely silent now. Students lined the walls like spectators at a gladiator match, their phones already recording what they sensed would be dramatic. Maya could feel their eyes on her, could hear their whispered speculations, but all of her focus was on Chelsea's next words. "My dad works for the government," Chelsea continued, her voice rising with confidence. "He has clearance for all sorts of classified stuff. Want to know what he told me about Maya Rodriguez? Want to know what kind of psycho killer they dumped in our school?" Maya's world went completely still. Every sound faded except for the rush of blood in her ears. In that moment, she wasn't 17-year-old Maya Rodriguez trying to fit in at high school. She was Agent Rodriguez, trained killer, weapon of the United States government. And someone had just compromised her cover. Chelsea opened her mouth to continue, but Maya moved faster than thought itself. One moment she was pressed against the lockers, the next she had crossed the 3 feet between them and grabbed Chelsea by the throat. Not hard enough to cause damage, her training was too precise for that, but firm enough to cut off whatever classified information was about to spill from her lips. "You don't know anything," Maya said, her voice completely calm despite the hurricane of violence swirling in her chest. "And you're going to keep it that way." Chelsea's eyes went wide with shock and fear. She tried to speak, but Maya's grip, while gentle by her standards, was immovable. Amber and Jess stood frozen, their mouths hanging open as they watched their supposedly untouchable leader being controlled by the quiet girl they'd been tormenting for weeks. "Maya," Let her go." The voice belonged to Mr. Henderson, the history teacher, who had emerged from his classroom to investigate the commotion. "Release her immediately." Maya looked at the teacher, then back at Chelsea's frightened face. Slowly, she released her grip and stepped backward, her hands raised in a gesture of surrender. Chelsea collapsed against the lockers, gasping and clutching her throat dramatically. "She attacked me!" Chelsea wheezed, though her voice was perfectly fine. "She tried to choke me! She's completely psycho!" Mr. Henderson looked between the two girls, clearly unsure of what he had actually witnessed. "Both of you, principal's office, now." As they walked toward the administrative wing, Chelsea leaned close to Maya and whispered, "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Rodriguez. I'm going to destroy you." Maya didn't respond, but something cold and dangerous settled in her chest. She had spent weeks trying to be normal, trying to fit in, trying to ignore the violence that had been trained into her very bones. But if Chelsea Patterson wanted to play with classified information and government secrets, then maybe it was time to remind everyone exactly what kind of person they were dealing with. The next few days passed in relative calm, but Maya knew it was the calm before the storm. She had been suspended for 2 days for aggressive behavior, while Chelsea had received only a warning for provocation. The injustice of it burned, but Maya used the time to think, to plan, and to remember skills she had been trying to forget. When she returned to school the following Monday, she could feel the change in the atmosphere immediately. Students whispered and pointed as she walked through the hallways. Some looked frightened, others curious, but all of them were watching her with new awareness. Chelsea had clearly been busy during Maya's absence, spreading whatever information her father had shared about Maya's background. The confrontation came during lunch period. Maya was sitting alone in the far corner of the cafeteria, picking at a sandwich she had no appetite for, when Chelsea approached with a larger group than usual. Along with Amber and Jess, she had recruited 3 seniors, football players whose size and arrogance made them perfect followers for someone like Chelsea. "Well, well," Chelsea announced loudly, making sure her voice carried across the cafeteria. "If it isn't our very own government experiment, tell me, Rodriguez, how many people did you kill before they dumped you here?" The entire cafeteria fell silent. Maya looked up slowly, meeting Chelsea's triumphant gaze with eyes that had gone completely flat and emotionless. It was a look that had terrified enemy agents and hardened criminals, but Chelsea was too drunk on her perceived power to recognize the danger. "I don't know what you're talking about," Maya said calmly. Chelsea laughed. "Really? Because my dad told me all about Project Blackbird, about how they take damaged kids and turn them into weapons, about how one of their little experiments went wrong and they had to relocate her to keep her from killing again." Maya's blood turned to ice. Project Blackbird was classified beyond top secret. The fact that Chelsea knew that name meant someone very high up in the government had leaked information to her father, or her father had accessed files he had no right to see. Either way, Maya's cover wasn't just blown, it was obliterated. "Stand up," Chelsea commanded. "I want everyone to see what a government killer looks like." Maya remained seated, her mind racing through possibilities. She could deny everything, but the damage was already done. She could report the security breach, but that would mean going back to Agent Morrison and admitting that her attempt at a normal life had failed. Or she could do what every instinct in her body was screaming at her to do. "I said stand up," Chelsea repeated, her voice rising. When Maya didn't move, Chelsea nodded to one of the football players. "Make her stand up." The boy, a senior named Derek, who was easily twice Maya's size, reached down and grabbed her arm. The moment his fingers made contact, Maya's training took over. She moved with fluid precision, using Derek's momentum against him as she rose from her seat. Her left hand trapped his wrist while her right drove into a pressure point just below his elbow. Derek's arm went completely numb, and he stumbled backward with a cry of pain and confusion. "Derek!" Chelsea shrieked. "What's wrong with you? She's just a little girl!" But Derek was staring at Maya with something approaching terror. He tried to flex his fingers and found that half his arm refused to respond. "What did you do to me?" he whispered. Maya looked around the cafeteria at the sea of shocked faces. Every student was staring at her, their phones recording every moment. There was no going back now, no pretending to be normal. Chelsea Patterson had made sure of that. "You want to know what I am?" Maya asked, her voice carrying clearly through the silent cafeteria. "Fine, I'll show you." She turned to face Chelsea directly, and for the first time, she let her true self show. Gone was the shy, awkward teenager. In her place stood someone who had been forged in violence and trained to be a weapon. Maya's posture changed, becoming centered and balanced. Her movements became fluid and controlled. Even her facial expression shifted from vulnerable to predatory. Chelsea took an involuntary step backward. "Stay away from me, freak. I'll call the police." "Go ahead," Maya said calmly. "Tell them that Chelsea Patterson has been sharing classified government information with her high school friends. Tell them that her father leaked details about Black Ops programs to intimidate a teenage girl. I'm sure they'll be very interested in that conversation." For the first time since Maya had known her, Chelsea looked genuinely frightened. "You're lying. My dad wouldn't..." "Project Blackbird was shut down 2 years ago," Maya continued, taking a step forward for each step Chelsea took back. "The only people who know that name are the 12 agents who survived the program and the handful of government officials with alpha-level clearance. So either your father is a traitor who leaked classified information, or you're lying about the whole thing to make yourself look important." Chelsea's face flushed red. "I'm not lying. I know exactly what you are." "Then you know that I was trained to neutralize threats with minimal collateral damage," Maya said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "You know that I can end this confrontation in about 15 different ways, most of which would leave you conscious long enough to understand exactly how badly you miscalculated." The crowd of students began to back away, sensing the shift in dynamics. Even the football players who had come with Chelsea were edging toward the exits. Only Amber and Jess remained, too shocked to move. Chelsea straightened her shoulders, trying to reclaim some of her lost authority. "You can't touch me. There are too many witnesses. You'd go to prison." Maya smiled then, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Chelsea, you just threatened to expose classified government operations in a room full of teenagers with smartphones. Do you really think prison is the worst thing that could happen to either of us right now?" The implication hung in the air like a physical presence. Chelsea's face went pale as she began to understand the magnitude of what she had done. Leaking classified information wasn't just a school disciplinary issue, it was a federal crime. I didn't mean," Chelsea stammered. "Here's what's going to happen," Maya said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had briefed senators and generals. "You're going to sit down, and you're going to shut up. You're never going to mention my background again to anyone, for any reason. You're going to stop harassing me, stop following me, and stop trying to make my life miserable. And if you're very, very lucky, I might not report your security breach to the people who would make you and your father disappear." Chelsea sank into the nearest chair as if her legs had given out. Tears were streaming down her face now, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of terror as she finally understood what kind of person she had been tormenting. "And just so we're absolutely clear about the new dynamic here," Maya continued, addressing the entire cafeteria, "I spent 4 years learning how to kill people with my bare hands. I can disarm bombs, pick locks, hack computer systems, and speak 6 languages fluently. I know 17 different ways to break someone's arm and 34 ways to render them unconscious. I was taught by the same people who train Delta Force and Navy SEALs, except my program was classified so far above their level that most generals don't even know it exists." She paused, letting that information sink in before continuing. "But you know what else I learned in those 4 years? I learned that real strength isn't about how much damage you can do. It's about choosing not to do it. I learned that the most dangerous person in any room is usually the one who doesn't need to prove it. And I learned that bullies like Chelsea Patterson are just scared children who think intimidation makes them powerful." Maya turned back to Chelsea, who was still crying silently in her chair. "So here's your choice, Chelsea. You can accept that you picked the wrong target and move on with your life, or you can keep pushing and find out exactly how much patience I have left. What's it going to be?" Chelsea nodded frantically, not trusting her voice to work. Amber and Jess had already fled, leaving their leader to face the consequences of her actions alone. Maya looked around the cafeteria one more time, meeting the eyes of students who had watched her being bullied for weeks without intervening. And for everyone else, maybe next time you see someone being harassed, you'll do something about it instead of just recording it for social media, because you never know who you're watching suffer in silence. With that, Maya picked up her untouched lunch and walked out of the cafeteria, leaving behind a room full of stunned students and one thoroughly defeated bully. The rest of the school day passed in a surreal haze. Teachers who had previously ignored Maya's existence now watched her with a mixture of respect and wariness. Students who had laughed at Chelsea's taunts now gave Maya a wide berth in the hallways. The transformation was complete. She was no longer the invisible target. She was the girl who had faced down the school's most feared bully and won without throwing a single punch. When the final bell rang, Maya gathered her things and headed for the exit, looking forward to the quiet of her foster home. But as she pushed through the front doors of the school, she found Chelsea waiting by the flagpole, alone and looking smaller than Maya had ever seen her. "Maya," Chelsea called softly, Can we talk?" Maya paused, every instinct telling her to keep walking. But something in Chelsea's voice, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before, made her stop. "What do you want, Chelsea?" Chelsea looked around nervously, making sure they were alone. "I wanted to apologize for everything. I didn't know. I thought I knew, but I didn't really understand." "Understand what?" "What it felt like to be actually scared," Chelsea admitted. "I've been the one making other people scared for so long that I forgot what it was like to be on the other side. When you looked at me in the cafeteria today, when I saw what you could really do, I've never been that terrified in my life." Maya studied Chelsea's face, looking for signs of deception and finding none. The arrogant bully from that morning was gone, replaced by a frightened teenager who was finally understanding the consequences of her actions. "Why did you do it?" Maya asked. "Why did you target me specifically?" Chelsea was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ground. "Because you reminded me of who I used to be," she finally said, "before I learned how to be mean, before I figured out that hurting people made them leave me alone. You were quiet and smart and you didn't bother anyone, and I hated you for it because I couldn't remember how to be like that anymore." The honesty in her voice surprised Maya. She had expected more lies, more manipulation, but this felt real. "My parents are getting divorced," Chelsea continued. "My dad's been working these crazy hours, taking calls at all hours of the night, bringing home classified files that he leaves all over the house. I think he's having an affair with someone at work, and my mom's been drinking to cope. Our house feels like a war zone, so I made school my war zone too. It was easier to hurt people than to admit that I was the one who was hurting." Maya felt something she hadn't expected, sympathy, not enough to excuse Chelsea's behavior, but enough to understand it. "That doesn't make what you did okay," Maya said firmly. "I know," Chelsea replied. "I know it doesn't. but I want to make it right, if I can. I want to be better than this." They stood in silence for a moment, two teenage girls who had been forced to grow up too fast for very different reasons. "The information about me," Maya said finally, "you need to forget it, all of it. If the wrong people find out that classified details are being discussed at dinner tables and shared in high school cafeterias, people will die. Do you understand that?" Chelsea nodded solemnly. "I won't tell anyone else, I promise, and I'll make sure my dad knows that I know things I shouldn't know. Maybe it'll make him more careful." "Good," Maya said. "And Chelsea, the next time you're hurting and you want to take it out on someone else, find a different way, because not everyone you target is going to show you the mercy I did today." Chelsea looked up at her with something approaching respect. "Why did you? Show mercy, I mean. You could have really hurt me. You could have gotten me arrested or worse. Why didn't you?" Maya considered the question seriously. "Because someone once told me that the strongest thing you can do is walk away. Today, I learned that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose not to fight, even when you have every reason to." She turned to leave, then paused. "But Chelsea, if you ever threaten me or anyone else again, if you ever try to use classified information to hurt people, if you go back to being the person you were this morning, mercy has limits." Chelsea nodded, understanding perfectly. "I won't. I promise, I won't." Maya walked away then, leaving Chelsea standing alone by the flagpole. As she made her way home, she reflected on the day's events. She had blown her cover, revealed skills she was supposed to keep hidden, and probably ended any chance she had of living a normal teenage life. But for the first time since arriving at Riverside High, she felt like herself again. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, but Maya recognized the coding pattern immediately. "Agent Morrison. Heard you had an interesting day at school. Call me." Maya sighed and dialed the number. Morrison answered on the first ring. "Rodriguez, want to explain to me why I'm getting reports of classified information being discussed in a high school cafeteria?" "Someone leaked Project Blackbird details to intimidate me," Maya replied. "I contained the situation." There was a long pause. "Contained how, exactly?" "By reminding everyone involved that leaking classified information has consequences," Maya said. "No permanent damage, no police involvement, no media attention. The threat has been neutralized." "And your cover?" Maya looked back toward the school, where she could still see Chelsea sitting by the flagpole, probably trying to figure out how to put her life back together. "Compromised, but manageable. I think I can work with it." Another pause. "You know this means the experiment is over, right? Normal teenager life, regular high school, we can't maintain that if your identity is compromised." "I know," Maya said, "but maybe that's okay. Maybe trying to pretend I'm something I'm not was the real mistake. Maybe I can find a different kind of normal." Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "You sure about this, Rodriguez? Once we acknowledge that your cover is blown, there's no going back to quiet and invisible." Maya thought about Chelsea's tears, about Derek's terror, about the way the entire cafeteria had looked at her with new respect and fear. She thought about the weeks of harassment she had endured in silence, and the moment when she had finally chosen to stand up for herself. "I'm sure," she said, "I'll never be normal, Morrison, but maybe I can be something better. Maybe I can be myself." "All right then," Morrison said, and Maya could hear the approval in his voice. "Welcome back to the world, Agent Rodriguez. Try not to blow anything up on your first week." Maya smiled as she ended the call. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, and probably a very interesting conversation with her foster parents. But for the first time since leaving the program, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. At Riverside High School, the story of Maya Rodriguez was just beginning, and this time she wasn't going to hide who she really was.